What if I told you that the biggest threat to your retirement isn't just poor investment returns or not saving enough? What's really dangerous is when those poor returns happen. And this could be the difference between running out of money at 80 or having your wealth grow throughout retirement. If you don't know me, my name's George Agan. I'm a chartered financial planner and I've helped thousands of people retire without worry. And today I'm going to show you the unique features of the retirement danger zone and what you can do specifically to make sure it doesn't impact your retirement. And I'm also going to give you 5 specific retirement saving techniques that you can use to solve this. So what is the retirement danger zone? Well, to explain this and the techniques that you can plan to manage this, I'm going to use the analogy of your retirement planning like climbing a frankly quite dangerous mountain. It's the trip of a lifetime, but it's not without its risks. You only get one shot of this journey and it's new terrain for you. Your job is simple: complete the journey in the best way possible. Think of the peak of the mountain as your asset values, like your savings and pensions. You spent all your life on the ascent building up your assets, and now you need to plan for how you get down. So the retirement risk zone, it's titled such because during this phase, it's the point of maximum risk in retirement planning. The reason this decade is so important is partly due to the nature of compounding. The maths behind compounding is that it's at the tail, so to speak, that the values kick up strongly towards the end. Therefore, the most impactful returns on how much your net worth is worth when you're going to draw down happens just before the spending stage. There is also a specific retirement risk called sequence risk, and that is the order of returns and how crucial they are to you in retirement. Sequence risk is like ice on the climb up the mountain. It has the risk of making your journey extremely dangerous, and also it can create what's called pound cost ravaging, where returns in the early period of retirement can have a disproportionate effect on the overall outcome if you're drawing down on the assets, regardless actually of the long-term nature of the returns over the entire retirement. And if it's not properly managed, it can cause untold havoc. So the lesson here that I just want to kind of really drill home is that your income over a 30-year retirement period is going to be driven largely, if you're relying on investments, by the investment returns over the first decade of your retirement. This means the way you draw income from your retirement portfolio needs to be very carefully managed. I also want to focus specifically on the fact that this isn't some abstract concept that I'm just talking about as some guy on YouTube. I've created 2 portfolios and just run a back test. And when we look at historical market data, one is broadly in line with the stock market's market capitalization. So it's a 100% equity portfolio. The other is 60-40. So again, globally diversified, but 60% stocks, 40% bonds. You can see even with a relatively short historical back test, you can see the worst events in the drawdown period for portfolio 1, the 100% stocks, took 4 years and 1 month to recover, and 3 years and 3 months the next, with the portfolio being underwater, so to speak, in the worst case for 5 years and 9 months. Now, portfolio 2, which is lower risk as it's typically defined, that's a 60-40. And you can see the drawdown in the worst case over the short period of testing was 36%, and the longest underwater period was for 3 years. My point here is simple. I think because in 2022 and 2020, we had relatively short bear markets, it's been quite easy for us all to get complacent about the nature of investment risk and its impact on retirement. Because realistically, it's been 17 years since a last prolonged and deep bear market. So we need to always be mindful of the historical precedents here of market risk. And I'm going to come back to this with a real world backtest using these techniques. So I just want to explain the techniques first, backed up by academic data. And I'm going to reference a paper that I've mentioned before called The 4 Approaches to Managing Retirement Income Risk by Dr. Wade Pfau. And I'm also going to add some which I believe are more effective. And I'm going to keep my mountain climb analogy going because why not? So the first technique I'm going to mention is called a cash buffer. So some of you may already know this. And if you think about climbing a mountain, think of your cash buffer as the supplies and a stormproof tent. The cash can't save you from the storm, but it can stop you getting caught up in it. The idea is that if you draw down on the cash when the market has declined, that will buy you time, so to speak, and figuratively. So that pound cost ravaging doesn't impact your portfolio. When we look at the academic data from Wade's paper, you can see that the impact of just skipping a year in the distributions in a bad year, where you use your cash to weather the storm, has a really big impact. And it has a huge impact on how long the funds last. The second technique I want to talk about is a bond ladder. And this is similar to the cash buffer, but with arguably a bit more precision. So you may have heard of a technique called gilt laddering. And gilt laddering is a UK retirement portfolio technique. And that involves buying multiple government bonds, gilts, with staggered maturity dates. Each gilt matures at different times, creating a regular stream of income while reducing the risk of having to sell assets at unfavorable prices, sequence risk. So the idea is that the bonds effectively mature at different points and they allow you to have time horizon on your portfolio. There is a problem. Unless you were to continually rebuy the bonds, ultimately you're in a position where you only got protection for the first couple of years of retirement. And the way I kind of would do the mountain analogy is this is like having a staged checkpoint at the start, as in base camp. It doesn't stop the danger of the climb, so to speak, but it does give you some protection. Okay, the third technique is partial annuity, or to annuitize a small amount. So what you do here is you use your funds to buy a guaranteed income stream, or perhaps instead of having a bond allocation to your portfolio, you decide to exchange some of your fund for the guaranteed income stream for the rest of your life. If we consider that at time of recording for a male, an RPI annuity for a 60-year-old on a single life, so just for the one person, is about 4.2%. As in, if you used £100,000 to purchase, you would get £4,200 in guaranteed income, RPI linked for the rest of your life. Obviously, annuity rates are subject to a host of factors and changes, so this is only broad guidance. Now, you could take the view that 4.2% inflation increasing going forward, especially RPI, is actually a decent rate. I mean, everyone harps on about the 4% rule. And yes, of course, there is a trade-off, but that trade-off has changed a lot since 2020 when rates for annuities were very low. And if that exchange comes with peace of mind in retirement, then it's arguably worth paying. So this is like choosing a small mountain to climb, I would say. You know, you might not make the peaks of Everest if things go really well, and you might not go as high and achieve as much. But if things go badly, you won't fall as far either. And you reduce your risk and increase your certainty of completing the climb. The fourth technique is to use equity release. Clearly, this is highly personal, depends on someone's circumstances, and is something to really get advice. And also, I would advise speak with the family so that everyone's kind of on the same page. But if someone's single and has an inheritance tax liability, you could make the case that using the equity release function to draw down some equity in the property, especially because many equity release products now do have that flexible drawdown facility, could actually be a really useful way to manage that sequence risk. So if the portfolio is in a decline, you use the equity release function. Now, there is an interesting kind of economic mixture of things that would happen here, because the downsides, of course, you're effectively giving up ownership of your property unless you repaid anything loaned. But you also then would pay interest on the home, which would have to be eventually sold. And it's certainly something to look into only after very careful consideration. Equity release, I think, is like calling in the helicopter. You can use it as a rescue option, but it's not without its risks. If the market's dipped really severely and you haven't done this in advance, it's highly likely that property prices could have been impacted as well, which could impact your borrowing ability. You could make the case that typically when there's a really bad recession, economies would normally have a lowering of interest rate, which would reduce your borrowing costs. But this is highly dependent on when you happen to take out the product. It's also important to say that in a stagflationary environment like the 1970s and arguably in 2022, there is absolutely no guarantee that you will have a market drop and also interest rate drops. And the fifth technique is a mixture. So you could use perhaps some cash alongside the backup of equity release, or maybe a partial annuity and a bond ladder. The equity release is probably the only backup which you could use as a last resort, because there's no point building a bond ladder if you've done it after the portfolio is dropped already, because that kind of defeats the point. The whole idea is there are 5 mountain-beating techniques which you can use, which are supported by the academic data. So what I wanted to do here is, instead of kind of just showing you a completely made-up cash flow, I've actually gone in and manipulated the cash flow and used the MSCI World Index actual data provided by Dimensional, but started it in year 1973. Now, if you don't know, this is inflation-adjusted data, and 1973 was a rubbish year for global equities. We saw in the UK and the US high inflation ravage many portfolios, and it caused significant and long stock and bond declines. So the whole purpose of me doing this is to really put the context on, because sometimes with these modelers, we just go, oh yeah, the market drops, it immediately bounces back, everyone's happy. And we do have to be mindful that sometimes that might not be the case. So what I've done firstly is just set up the retirement journey via a hypothetical cash flow model, as I explained. Someone who's retiring at 60 and is single, and you'll see that I've got £350,000 in pensions and a full state pension. Now, don't worry too much about the expenditure. I've modeled this so if we have the expenditure on the same for all of them, but effectively the funds last beyond age 100. So what we've done firstly is we have effectively just a cash flow model. And as you can see, based on this flatline return, based on the initial portfolio of £350,000, you can see the money is quite comfortably getting to beyond age 100. In fact, we are projecting that age 100, based on this current journey, that they're going to have £283,000 at 100. Maybe they're going to have too much. Now, here is the problem, and this is the issue with deterministic modeling. When I then overlay the stress test, as in the MSCI from 1973, and they try and then map that retirement journey, you can see money is running out at age 70, which is really not ideal. So this is the starting point. We've got age 70, and we're now going to have a look and see what would happen if we try those different techniques and see if it can save us from, frankly, a horrific set of returns. So cash buffer for 2 years. You can see in blue, the cash buffer is there, been there for 2 years. I had programmed it so it spent that down first. It doesn't really make much difference. It would probably be useful, but as you can see when I put them next to each other, sorry, that's the first one. Let me switch by, oh, there we go. If I click the right thing, you can see that is it marginally improving? No, it's not even marginally improving, which is probably more to do with the fact that how the returns panned out from 1973. So the cash buffer for 2 years, yes, it can be useful, but you are counting effectively on the market bouncing back within a relatively short space of time. So let's have a look at the bond ladder. Now the bond ladder, and you can see the colors have changed slightly because I've got the bond ladder going in 1, 2, and 3 years before it gets spent down. Again, we're not seeing much improvement. It has improved marginally. Has it? Yes, marginally, I think, but not by much. Yeah, not by much at all. We're still having funds that are running out at age 70, which is way, way earlier than we would require and expect. So what happens now if we try an annuity? So what I've done here is, just as a guidance, I've gone from 350,000. We've annuitized 25% of the portfolio using that 4.2 RPI linked annuity. And again, we're in a worse position this time around, unfortunately. Hey, just editor here. One thing that I wasn't quite happy about how I explained this is that actually, though the funds draw down at 67, because they have the annuity, in this instance, they actually would have about 15,500 plus of guaranteed income because they'd have the state pension and the annuity. So while the money still runs out, projecting they're going to continue to draw down the same amount, actually the baseline income that they have is probably the best that it is compared to all the other stress tests. So I just wanted to mention that so that that option is fairly interpreted. So it just goes to show that while all these techniques can be useful, they're not always necessarily going to save you if the returns are particularly poor. The next one is equity release of £100,000. So here I plugged it in for £100,000 at age 70. Now, what you're seeing that actually the funds ran out just before the 70th birthday, as I would expect. Probably should have done it from 69. But the equity release does buy a few years, as you would expect. So the conclusions of this are these techniques clearly are doing something, but it really does depend. Now, when I go into the mixture, what I've done here is I've done a mixture of reducing expenditure, because I think if the returns really were that bad, that we would have to adjust expectations. We clearly have had a pretty bad start to retirement. So I've done a reduced expenditure of 15%. I've also used a bond ladder, and then I've done an equity release. And when I look and compare that, you can see just that we survive. So we have a position where effectively the bond ladder helps us in the early bit of retirement. We then have equity release come in just in time. And actually then, because there is enough portfolio, the better returns that start to kick in the 80s really start actually driving the returns in the portfolio and put us in a good position. So I think that's really telling, isn't it? Just the impact of effectively sometimes using these levers but also how negative things can be in particular downturns and why it's important to have that adaptive framework. I think what's really interesting about all these approaches is, yes, they might reduce your returns slightly in the good times, but they can dramatically improve your outcomes in bad markets. So you might want to know, do I typically advise some kind of buffer strategy? Well, the thing to say is not everyone needs to. You might have something like a tax-free cash flow defined benefit scheme so that you don't actually need to provide additional cash or bond allocation. Some already have lots of cash for various reasons specific to them and don't need to bring in a buffer. So I'm not saying it's for everyone. I'm just saying if it's clear in someone's retirement planning that they're going to rely on portfolio returns, which is many, then I do typically advise some sort of buffer strategy, despite the acknowledgement that if things go really well, it may not be the perfectly optimal back-tested strategy. In fact, there's actually an academic paper which specifically has this conclusion. When they go through all the data, they effectively say that, well, yes, you probably will reduce your upside slightly when we test it, but ultimately it's the behavioral benefits that you get. And I completely agree with this. The best plan is the one that you can stick to. And for that reason, buffer strategies, in my view, can really work. The thing is, as an advisor, it's my job to know the academic data and the research. But actually, what my clients want from me is peace of mind for retirement for them. It's quite a leap from going from working to retired. And sadly, no amount of financial planning or back testing can predict the future. So do you agree in everything that I've said there? Well, if you do, you might be interested in the most recent video I did on pensions and inheritance tax changes after the budget and actually how they're going to implement it. I think there's quite a few issues to come down the pipe on that. So it's well worth a watch if you haven't already. Either way, thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.